And thank you all for being here. I really want to say to all of my colleagues who have been such a big part of this effort, some of whom you'll hear from today, all of the great advocacy organizations, with a special nod to the extraordinary leadership of HRC and Chad, thank you. And you're going to hear from so many of the organizations that have been a part of this very long struggle. This work began a little over 5 years ago, based on this very simple idea that members of the LGBTQ community should be allowed to live in America free from discrimination of any kind. And so we began the work to take the existing civil rights architecture and make sure that we expanded it to include our community and make certain that discrimination based on sexual orientation or gender identity no longer would be legal in this country. And today we're going to have a very historic vote when the House passes the Equality Act. And our work then will turn to the Senate, where we're going to have to demand that Mitch McConnell not be the Grim Reaper that he's described himself as, but give voice to this very strong belief in equality in our country. What's really important to recognize is that a majority of voters, citizens in every single state in this country support equality for our community. It is overwhelmingly popular, the Equality Act, all across this country. The only place it remains controversial is in the Republican caucus. This is a question where really Congress has to catch up with the country. Because, in fact, most places in the country when you talk to folks about the reality of members of our community, that you can literally be married on Saturday, post your wedding pictures to Facebook on Sunday, and be fired from your job or kicked out of your apartment on Monday in a majority of states in this country, people don't believe that's true. They think that can't possibly be true. And the reason it's hard for them to believe is because it is so contrary to the deeply held belief in equality and equal justice under the law, the founding values of our country. So today is a really historic day because we will pass the Equality Act and give meaning to those founding values for all of us, and it will create the kind of momentum we need to be sure that the Senate takes the equality up and that we all live in a country once and for all that recognizes that discrimination against the LGBTQ community is wrong and won't be tolerated. So I just want to say thank you to everyone who's been part of this, and I have now the great honor of introducing my co-chair, one of the co-chairs of the Equality Caucus, from the great state of California, Mark Takano.
Thank you. Well, Congressman David Cicilline, thank you for your yeoman's work. And I think you will agree, today is a great day to be gay. In just a few hours, we're going to cross that plaza, walk up those steps, and go down to the floor, and we're going to be one step closer to passing the Equality Act. Right. Historic legislation that will make equality the law of the land. And so I want to thank my friend and fellow LGBT caucus co-chair, Representative Cicilline, for leading this important effort, and members of the LGBT Equality Caucus for championing this bill. And I especially want to thank all of the organizations here today who have been tireless in the trenches fighting for LGBTQ rights and defending our community every step of the way. This would not have been possible without your support or without the millions of Americans who helped elect pro-equality Democratic majorities last November. So let's hear it for the American people and all of you. We the people is a bold opening statement enshrined in our Constitution. But for far too long, LGBTQ Americans have not been included in We the People. And that changes today. This legislation will ensure that students, workers, shoppers, and renters in every state cannot be discriminated against because of their identities. No person, no matter where they live in America, should face discrimination. Equality should not depend on the zip code where you live. When this bill becomes law, LGBTQ people facing discrimination will have the law on their side. There will be recourse in the face of injustice, and this is long overdue. So I want to send a special message to the LGBTQ youth watching this vote today. We are on your side, and we are fighting for you and your rights. Full equality for LGBTQ people is within reach. Now, it's up to all of us. It's up to the American people. It's up to all of us here to demand that leader Mitch McConnell and President Trump act. Public sentiment, the power of the people, is what is going to get us across the finish line. After the United States v. Windsor decision was announced, right there on the steps of the Supreme Court, I said that I was feeling fabulous, that I was feeling every gay word that I could think of. And that's exactly how I feel this morning. Think of all the gay words you feel right now. I can think of a lot. I urge my colleagues to be on the right side of history, so let's go vote yes on the Equality Act. Because we deserve to be a part of we the people too. Thank you. Now I want to bring up my colleague, Representative Chris Pappas in New Hampshire. Chris?
Thank you. Well, thank you, Chairman Takano. It is great to be here with so many incredible allies, so many members of the LGBTQ community who have got us here to this momentous occasion here on Capitol Hill this morning. This is an incredible day, and this is one I am going to remember when I get to cast my ballot on the floor in favor of full equality for the LGBTQ community. There's nothing more American than this: liberty and justice for all. And you know what? While we haven't always recognized it throughout the course of our nation's history, we have been making incredible progress. And we are steering closer to the founding principles that created this nation back in the late 1700s. I'm honored to be here with you all today, and I think of a few groups of individuals today. I think of those who have come before us, who face down discrimination on a daily basis, and who risk their lives, their health, their safety to be who they are. We stand on their shoulders, and the fact that they were able to be out and be visible has allowed our community to achieve great success. I also think of those across our country who still face discrimination today. I think of a young woman who's coming out who's fearing about being rejected by her family. I think about a trans woman who doesn't want to become a hate crime statistic like so many others have. I think of a young gay man who's considering suicide because he's been told that he's less than. It's about time we correct this injustice. As Dr. King would say, justice delayed is justice denied, and it's time that we correct this today and pass the Equality Act now. So I'm really honored to stand with so many heroes here today. One of them is Chad Griffin from the Human Rights Campaign, and I'd like to invite him up now. Chad.
Thank you so much, Congressman. Thank you, Congressman Pappas. I also just want to extend my thanks and appreciation to Congressman Cicilline for his steadfast leadership to ensure that we are here for this day on the Equality Act. In addition, I want to acknowledge and thank Mark Takano and Speaker Pelosi and all the groups that are represented here today for their many, many years of leadership that have gotten us to this historic moment as we stand on the verge of the House of Representatives voting to protect LGBTQ people from discrimination in their daily lives. The Equality Act is grounded in common sense. It's rooted in our most basic and shared fundamental American values. And it's also rooted in that American promise of equal justice under law. That's why the Equality Act has the support of more than 200 leading businesses, representing more than 10.4 million employees in all 50 states. And that's why it has the bipartisan support of 7 out of 10 Americans, including majorities in all 50 states. So today, we urge every member of Congress, Republicans and Democrats alike, to stand on the right side of history and vote yes on the Equality Act. And after we pass this landmark legislation in the House this morning, we will then take our fight to the Senate. And we call on all senators, Democrats and Republicans, to join us in demanding that Mitch McConnell allow a vote on the Equality Act. Because the time is now to finally ensure that every LGBTQ person, especially our young people, in every corner of this vast country is equal and protected under the law. It's now my pleasure to introduce a brave advocate for trans equality, the founder of Black Trans Men, Inc., Carter Brown.
Hello, I'm Carter Brown, and I'm honored to be here today in support of the Equality Act for myself, my family, and for thousands of other Americans whose livelihood is dependent upon this amendment to the law to include us as equal citizens, regardless of gender identity or sexual orientation. Like many Americans, I once subscribed to the American dream in believing that if I pursued my education and secured a good career, I would be able to provide a comfortable living for myself, achieve home ownership, and eventually create a family of my own someday. And I did just that despite many challenges along the way. I got a decent education and built a career that I proudly excelled in, which afforded me the ability to create and provide for my family. Until the day I arrived at my workplace and was confronted by colleagues about rumors that I was a transgender man. Following this confrontation, I had to endure months of offensive questions, harassment, gossip, and many discriminatory interactions in the workplace, all of which eventually led to my termination of employment because of my identity as a transgender person. It was then that I quickly learned that the American dream is not accessible to all Americans. I made many attempts to seek recourse, only to find that the law did not have any legal protections from discrimination for gender identity, and therefore my termination was legally justified in my home state of Texas. Sadly, my story is only one of countless LGBTQ Americans living, working, and contributing in over 30 states that do not provide fully inclusive, non-discrimination protections for all citizens, to have an opportunity to work and earn wages to care for themselves and their families. I know that our society may not all share the same values, but I believe every person should be valued and have full opportunity to work hard, pursue happiness, and a productive citizenship as an inalienable right. That is why I fully support the Equality Act, because having equal opportunities should not be a matter of gender identity. For many, it's a matter of survival. And next, I'd like to bring forward Ms. Mara Kessling of the National Center for Transgender Equality.
Good morning, everybody. I'm Mara Kiesling, the Executive Director of the National Center for Transgender Equality. I want to thank Representative Pappas, Chairman Takano, and especially Representative David Cicilline for leading the effort on this bill. Today's vote marks a triumph for the liberty of transgender people nationwide. Trans people have been denied our freedom for generations, trapped by ignorance, fear, and violence that too often marks our lives. I want to also take a moment to thank three people who are here. I've worked on this bill in various iterations for 20 years. And I know there are three people here who I just want to call out who might not be speaking today, but Winnie Stackelberg from the Center for American Progress, David Stacey from the Human Rights Campaign, and my own NCTE colleague, Lisa Motet, who all worked on this in the 1990s. Thank you very much for your work and leadership over the years. Under the leadership of Speaker Pelosi and Representative Cicilline, the House today is going to set the groundwork for a future in which trans people and all LGBTQ people are free to prosper and thrive alongside their fellow Americans. But be clear about today. We have not come this far to only come this far. Once this bill is passed through the House, Leader McConnell must bring it to the Senate floor for a vote. We know he doesn't want to, but denying trans people and LGBTQ people their most basic rights would be nothing short of a moral crime, one that would stain this Senate for years. Now is not the time for partisanship, brinksmanship, or cowardice. Now is the time senators must fulfill their duty to uphold the rights of all people in their states and serve the interests of the nation over the interests narrowly of their party. Thank you very much, and thank you all for being here today. I'd now like to introduce my colleague and good friend Mason Davis from Freedom for All Americans.
All right, Mason.
Thank you, Mara. I'm Mason Davis, CEO of Freedom for All Americans. And as you've heard, today is a historic day. For the first time ever, the U.S. House of Representatives, the People's House, will debate and vote on a bill that would ensure express and enduring protections for LGBTQ people in virtually all areas of American life. It is time for this, America. The truth is, discrimination is happening to LGBTQ people across this country every day. Yet in 30 states, our community lacks clear and basic protections under the law. It's urgent that we secure the strongest possible nationwide protections for as many people as we can as quickly as possible. It's time to assure the transgender youth and their families that they can be supported and safe in school. It's time to assure rural gay men that they can share their wedding photos at work without fear of being fired. It's time to ensure the aging lesbian couple will be treated fairly at their local assisted care facility. As a gay man and as a transgender man myself, I know how urgent and life-saving these protections are. And I'm not alone. 7 out of 10 Americans at this point support basic protections for LGBTQ Americans across the country. Businesses, large and small, including the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, have come out in support of the act. And increasingly, we're seeing progressive and conservatives alike coming together to support LGBTQ freedom in the states. Dignity and respect shouldn't depend on who we are, who we love, or where we live. And that's why I urge, and hope you will urge, Congress to pass the Equality Act today. Thank you. I'll turn it over to Christine Lucius, Executive Vice President for Policy from the Leadership Conference on Civil and Human Rights.
Good morning. Thank you so much. The Leadership Conference on Civil and Human Rights is a coalition of more than 200 national organizations dedicated to working toward an America as good as its ideals. And one of those ideals is equal justice under law. We must all be able to live free from discrimination, to express our whole selves and build our families openly without fear or bigotry. Passage of the Equality Act is a crucial step in fulfilling our nation's commitment to civil and human rights for all people. And we have made it this far because so many people have worked so long and shared their heartbreaking stories about why we need this bill. Our work is not complete until every person in America is able to earn a living, further their education, put a roof over their heads, and engage in public life without fear of harassment or discrimination. And no one's civil rights should depend on their zip code. When our society is more equal, we are all better for it. That's why the Equality Act has the support of civil rights groups, faith leaders, business leaders, and the majority of people in this country. I want to thank our partners from the civil rights leaders here with us today, to our friends in Congress co-sponsoring this legislation. We are very grateful to Congressman Cicilline and to Chairs Nadler, Scott, Waters, McGovern, and especially to Speaker Pelosi for their steadfast leadership in advancing this bill. In a few hours, we hope the House will do what's right and pass the Equality Act. While today's vote is historic, it is not the end. Everyone who spoke up will need to demand that the Senate act, and not just Mitch McConnell. Each and every senator should make their position clear on the Equality Act and be held accountable. It is time to pass the Equality Act now. Thank you so much for your support. And I'm going to turn it over to another great civil rights leader, Sunu Chandy, Legal Director of the National Women's Law Center.
Good morning. I'm Sunu Chandy. I'm here as the Legal Director of the National Women's Law Center. My parents came from India in the early 1970s to attend seminary. My father went on to be a minister and a hospital chaplain, and my mother, while she was a high school teacher, she also took her master's in religion. Needless to say, I grew up going to Wednesday night Bible study, prayer meeting, and spent all of my Sundays in church. I share that to say, as a pastor's kid, even as a full-fledged Unitarian now, it's scripture that comes to me in the most exciting times. I'm sharing Ecclesiastes 4:12. A person standing alone can be attacked and defeated, but two can stand back to back and conquer. Three are even better, for a triple braided cord is not easily broken. We're here today for this vote because all of the groups here and all we represent, and these members and their staffers, made a decision to engage together and fight for a common cause. We decided to trust each other and be authentic to all we represent. I want to lift up at the National Women's Law Center Fatima Goss-Graves and Emily Martin, who worked along many of the folks gathered here to do this work in the years past. And I especially want to thank the racial justice groups for supporting the Equality Act, because that means you're doing right by us as queer people of color and championing the true message that racial justice work must include a fight against sex discrimination, including discrimination faced by LGBTQ folks. This braiding of the cord sends a powerful message that we are on one team to all who may oppose us. Delighted to be here on behalf of the National Women's Law Center, a leading women's rights organization for the past 45 years. From that position, I'm here to say the fight against discrimination against LGBTQ folks is part and parcel of the fight against sex discrimination. The courts have recognized that. EEOC is on record saying that. It's time that our federal laws become explicit on that point too, through the Equality Act. As a women's rights organization, we are committed to LGBTQ rights because we are committed to the fight against sex discrimination when it's faced by anyone. The National Women's Law Center is delighted to be here and celebrate the solidarity between all of the groups here and the members here, and we look forward to the historic vote today and passing the Equality Act in the House. Thank you. And I'm here to also introduce Winnie Stockelberg, who you heard was a pioneer and worked on this for years from the Center for American Progress.
I think that just means I'm old. My name is Winnie Stackelberg. I'm the Executive Vice President of External Affairs at the Center for American Progress. I want to thank Chairman Takano and Representative Pappas. I want to thank Congressman Cicilline for your incredible leadership. And I want to thank Speaker Pelosi and all of the members of the House leadership who stood behind the Equality Act. I also want to acknowledge the amazing organizations who have fought relentlessly to advance this bill and to bring it to where it is today. Later this morning, the House of Representatives will pass one of the most important and sweeping pieces of civil rights legislation in modern American history. We all know that the journey to arrive at this vote has been long and at times grueling. In fact, it has been nearly 45 years since the first version of the Equality Act was introduced in Congress. I know that at times some of us may have wondered if we'd ever arrive at this day. Yet despite all the challenges we face, and we will continue to face, this morning should serve as a beacon of hope. Today's vote is proof that progress is not only still possible, but that it is actually unfolding each and every day. It is a testament to the fact that love, compassion, and justice can triumph over the forces of division and intolerance. But today's victory has never been inevitable. It is the result of hard work and unrelenting commitment of those who have refused to accept temporary defeats as a permanent retreat. I want to thank every single person, every LGBTQ person here today, and our allies who has joined in the cause and traveled this long journey with us. And I know we'll all keep pushing after the House of Representatives votes as we move to the Senate and beyond. We've got to reach the end of this journey, and the Equality Act becomes law of the land everywhere in our country. I'm so thrilled to be fighting with each and every one of you. Thank you so very much. And now I am pleased to introduce the Reverend Peter Simmons Sy from the Metropolitan AME Church.
Good morning. Good morning. Good morning. I am Reverend Peter Simmons Sy from the Metropolitan African Methodist Episcopal Church here in Washington, D.C. First, I would like to give honor to the ancestors whose shoulders I stand on and allow me to be here on today. Now, we are all created wonderfully and beautifully in the image of the Eternal Spirit. Though we may have similar characteristics, because of the wisdom of the Eternal Spirit, no two individuals are completely alike. We are authentic in our individuality. We must honor and respect the diversity of humanity. We have different identities, and there is no one better than or worse than anyone else. As the same gender-loving black man who is also a 14-year active duty veteran of the U.S. Armed Forces, I have experienced discrimination for being black and being same-gender loving. I am forced to live by standards that are framed by white, heteronormative, patriarchal biases. Today, in 2019, there are neighborhoods where I am viewed as a threat and my life is automatically in danger because of the color of my skin. There are some places where my husband, Brian, who is also a veteran, and I are not welcome because we have openly committed our love and life to each other. The Equality Act is a positive step towards making sure that all humanity in this country have the opportunity to what Thomas Jefferson penned. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all humanity are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. By the vote of yes to the Equality Act, you will say no to white heteronormative patriarchal supremacy. You will say no to homophobia. You will say no to transphobia. You will say no to racist authorities which encourage hate and violence. A vote of yes to the Equality Act is a vote for life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness for every citizen in these United States of America, regardless of race, gender, identity, or sexual orientation. Thank you. Next, we will have Sharon McGowan, which is Legal Director and Chief Strategy Officer of Lambda Legal.
Good morning, everyone. It is wonderful to be here celebrating a step forward as opposed to one of the many setbacks we have experienced in these recent years. I want to salute Congressman Cicilline, Congressman Takano, Congressman Pappas, thank Chairman Nadler and Speaker Pelosi for leading this effort with a conviction, courage, and fortitude that these times call for. For 45 years, Lambda Legal has been the law firm for the LGBTQ community. We have taken hundreds of calls every year from people who have experienced discrimination in employment, in housing, in credit, in places of public accommodation. And often we have not had the tools that we have needed to be able to address the discrimination they have experienced. Sometimes that is because it is an area of the law in which there are blatantly insufficient protections, and other times it's because there are laws on the books that should protect LGBT people, but courts have turned a blind eye and said, you're not welcome here. We are going to read you out of this law. The Equality Act will make sure that that never happens again. The words will be on the page in a way that can be undeniable. And so even though we know that it is a form of sex discrimination when you terminate someone for having a same-sex spouse or for having undertaken a gender transition, the Equality Act today will make sure that no one ever again will be confused about what the law requires. And we know from these calls that we have experienced, this discrimination falls disproportionately on people of color, people living in the South, people who are living in the economic margins. And we know that the Equality Act will not solve all of those problems. Racism, classism, ableism will continue to deny so many people full and equal opportunity. But today, my friends, is a necessary, if not sufficient, step forward to making this country live up to the ideals that we all want this country to stand for. Every day we need to make this country the country we all deserve. And so I stand here with so many wonderful colleagues, knowing that today is an incredible step forward. I join the calls for courage from Leader McConnell, because I tell you, there are more than 60 votes in the Senate for this bill. There are more than 60 votes in the Senate when you have 7 out of 10 Americans of every party, of every political stripe, of every faith, knowing that it is wrong for someone to be denied housing, denied employment, denied equal education because of their sexual orientation and gender identity. My friends, now is the time. We need not wait any longer. We need not wait for stars to align. The stars have aligned and the day is here. And so I thank you all for all that you have already done and urge all of you to do everything else you can. As I say, get grandma on the phone. Get your local PTA leader on the phone. There is nothing that we cannot do when we stand together and demand the country that we deserve. And so with that, I want to hand it off to another incredible leader in this movement and a dear friend, Diego Sanchez from PFLAG.
You know, today we're going to share a tremendous victory. We share something else, though. PFLAG is a family organization. We all come from some type of family. And when we were babies, our parents probably all told us one thing: honesty is the best policy. I'm sure some of you heard it before, over and over. My parents taught me that. And I've always been honest, sometimes to my peril. When I was coming out of high school, I wanted to go to West Point. And my father said, this is a land of honesty. It's a land of integrity. You have to disclose. So I did disclose, and therefore never got to serve the country I wanted to in the military. When I was in my 40s, 100 years ago, when I worked for a global corporation, I've always worked for global corporations, but this one I was in charge of communications and diversity. And I was told I could not put transgender into the global diversity statement. And I said, I have to, because I cannot leave myself out of our policy that I'm creating. And my boss looked at me, who was the executive VP of HR, and said, we can't have people like you, transgender people, working here. And I was summarily fired against the desire of the CEO and CEO. But she owned my body for that moment. But I own my body. And I will tell you that, Congressman Pappas, I'm rarely humbled and quiet, but you really said something that I realize that I own a pair of those shoulders. I've been doing this work for about 50 years. Started when I was 12. And have worked on this bill and many. But this one is the one that's going to move. It's going to move in a way that no other has. The numbers are there. The votes are there. The pressure to push the Senate to do the same is there. But we don't take enough time to thank our friends. So I just want to do this last thing. I want to thank the co-chairs of the Equality Caucus. Thank you for being here. I want to thank the committee chairs, Maxine Waters, Jerry Nadler, Bobby Scott, Jim McGovern from Massachusetts, Pramila Jayapal for telling a very courageous story in the Judiciary Committee meeting, the hearing, and my own member of Congress, Ayanna Pressley. I also especially want to thank Speaker Pelosi, Majority Leader Hoyer, and Majority Whip Jim Clyburn from my neighboring South Carolina. I'm from Georgia originally. The groups here today have been a coalition for a long time, and I've worked with all of them on a lot of things, but I will tell you that this was the most concerted, the most tightly worked, the most penetrative of all, and it leads to where we're going today together. So with that, I would like to introduce my dear friend and tremendous leader, Ian Thompson from ACLU.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Ian Thompson. I'm a senior legislative representative with the American Civil Liberties Union. As you've already heard, today is historic for many reasons. For the first time in the entire history of our country, Congress will vote on comprehensive, nationwide, non-discrimination protections for LGBTQ people. Today, as I watch the debate and vote on the Equality Act, I will be thinking about the thousands of LGBTQ people who were fired from their jobs with the federal government during the Lavender Scare of the 1950s. I will be thinking about trans pioneers like Marsha P. Johnson, who 50 years ago, next month, fought back against police violence and persecution against LGBTQ people at the Stonewall Inn. I'll be thinking about an entire generation of gay men who are not here to witness this moment, due to government indifference to HIV/AIDS during the Reagan and Bush years. I will also be thinking about the ACLU's incredibly courageous LGBTQ clients who have fought back against the discrimination they endured. People like Megan Taylor, Gavin Grimm, Andre Cooley, Patricia Dawson, Dave Mullins and Charlie Craig, Joaquin Carcano, Amy Stevens, and Darn Zarda. While we're not yet at the finish line, that we have arrived at this moment is a testament to the determination over many generations of LGBTQ people across the country. We also know that it would not have been possible without the support and solidarity of partners and allies across the civil rights community. As we witness history unfold before us today, let us also rededicate ourselves to continuing the fight for true, lived equality for all LGBTQ people, because we can settle for no less. And with that, I'm happy to turn things over to Kiara Johnson from the National LGBTQ Task Force.
Good morning. Y'all didn't know you were going to get Equality Church this morning, huh? What a very historic moment, and it's so exciting to be with you all here today. My name's Kiara Johnson. I am a Black woman. I am a bisexual person. I am a mother of two. I am a Georgia native in my heart and a DC resident by choice. And the Equality Act means the world to me. We are here and the winds of change are at our backs. It feels fitting that yesterday was the anniversary of the Brown versus Board of Education decision, which declared segregation in schools unconstitutional. It was here that the notion of separate but equal was delegitimized. Separate but equal. It is an illusion. It has no place in separating us by race, and it has no place in separating us by gender identity. It has no place in separating us by sexual orientation. Like Brown versus Board of Education, the Equality Act is more than ink on paper. It is more than a vote. Equality lives in our backs. And today, we stand a little bit straighter. Equality lives in our voices, and today we sing a little bit louder. Equality lives in our spirit, and our hope for the future is fortified today. As we turn our eyes, our ears, our hearts, and our minds to the Senate, I want them to know that championing the Equality Act means championing health for all of us all the time. It means championing opportunity, the opportunity to thrive for all of us all the time. It means championing dignity for each and every one of us all the time. Thank you. And I get to introduce Julie Cruz, the Director of Federal Policy, Family Equality Council.
Hi, my name is Julie Cruz, and I'm the Director of Federal Policy at Family Equality Council. We're an organization of LGBTQ and two-spirit parents, the millions of LGBTQ Americans who have children, and we are thrilled on us. It harms our children. Our babies have been turned away by emergency pediatricians because of their lesbian moms. Lesbian families have been left with procedures burdened with additional responsibilities and care because of loathsome discrimination. This is why Justice Kennedy during the Supreme Court marriage equality decision said, what about the children of these unions? And decided our families need full legal equality. But marriage equality is not enough. We need an end to discrimination that harms LGBTQ and two-spirit people, and that harms and endangers our children and families, and that harms the American family that we are all part of. So thank you to Congressman Cicilline, thank you to Congressman Pappas, to Chairman Nadler, to Chairman Scott, to Leader Pelosi for acting today to protecting our families and the American family, which is bound together by love. Thank you. And I am turning it over to my good friend Jen Herrick from People for the American Way.
Good morning. My name is Jen Herrick. I am the Senior Policy Analyst at People for the American Way. PFAW and its more than 1.5 million supporters nationwide are committed to gender equity. And for us, that includes promoting equality and recognition for transgender, gender expansive, and all LGBTQ plus people. The Equality Act will help us achieve that goal by protecting the LGBTQ plus community against discrimination in housing, employment, and other key areas of life. And on the 65th anniversary of the Brown versus Board decision, it's important to note that the Equality Act also strengthens existing civil rights protections for people of color and other systemically oppressed communities. And it takes a stand against those who are misusing the federal religious freedom law in order to harm others, discriminate against them, and take away their rights. This is a bill that every American should be proud of. Fighting for justice for all is the American way. Every member of the House should vote for H.R. 5 today, and every member of the Senate should urge Leader McConnell to swiftly bring it to a vote. Thank you for joining us in this fight.
Great, thank you to everybody. That concludes the press conference. Some of our speakers will be available for individual one-on-ones. For folks interested in a group photo and